Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today, the Board of Directors made a decision to reduce the key rate by 100 basis points down to 4.5% per annum. 1 percentage point is much more than the pace we have been following in the recent few years. Although this decision was expected by both analysts and the financial market, I believe it is reasonable to explain why the current situation demands exactly this pace of reduction. Already in April, the drastic changes in the economic situation evidenced that disinflationary factors would be prevailing over the medium-term horizon. The conditions required a shift towards accommodative monetary policy. Therefore, we then made the decision to cut the key rate by 0.5 percentage points. What has happened over 1.5 months after the previous key rate decision, and what are the grounds for reducing the key rate by another percentage point now? First, the economic situation is unfolding in such a way that the disinflationary effect will be even more significant than we assumed in April. The restrictions have been in place for a longer period and are being eased on a step-by-step basis. Moreover, the maximum reduction in oil production within the OPEC Plus deal has been extended for July, which will somewhat strengthen both primary and secondary effects. This implies that demand in the second quarter will presumably decline slightly deeper and will be recovering over a longer period of time than we expected 1.5 months ago. Second, the effect of short-term inflationary factors that we considered when making our decision in April has been exhausted. Monthly inflation in May substantially slowed down compared to April. At present, season-adjusted price growth in annualized terms is close to or even slightly beneath 4%. Inflation expectations lowered after temporarily picking up in March-April. Third, monetary conditions have started to ease in May-June after the tightening in March-April, which is proven by both the indicators of financial markets and business surveys. This has been driven by the governmental programs supporting borrowers, including both pandemic-affected enterprises and households. However, given the scale of disinflationary trends, the situation requires a considerable additional easing of monetary conditions. Fourth, risks to financial stability have significantly decreased. The market situation has normalized, volatility has diminished considerably, risk premiums have lessened, and oil prices have recovered to $40 per barrel. Hence, the developments over the last 1.5 months fully substantiate the existing potential for a notable reduction in the key rate, and we are now using this potential. At our upcoming meetings, we will consider the necessity of further key rate reduction. Now, regarding the factors that may be behind such a decision and our current expectations, up-to-date indicators show the economic activity has partially revived, being driven by the progressive easing of the restrictions in the majority of Russian regions. However, it will take time to restore production to logistical chains. The past period might have altered businesses' investment and production plans and consumers' preferences. Households will possibly become more cautious about their expenses, opting to save money and put off larger or discretionary purchases. Eventually, all this may impact potential economic growth rates and the pace of its recovery. Right now, it is hard to estimate this influence on the potential. A lot will depend on the recovery pace of the global economy, the situation with the pandemic, the cancellation of the anti-coronavirus restrictions, and businesses and households' sentiment and expectations. The current economic situation has required additional government policy measures, specifically fiscal measures, to support businesses and households. The planned scope of fiscal measures is expanding. At the present moment, the government is preparing a recovery plan for the national economy. The plan will seek both to overcome the economic consequences of the coronavirus and to restore and ultimately boost the economic potential. We are involved in the discussions of this plan and will take it into consideration when pursuing our monetary policy. As noted earlier, main negative spillovers of the restrictions will affect the second quarter, which will be followed by recovery in the third and fourth quarters. The full reversal of GDP to the 2019 levels is likely to occur only in the first half of 2022. With that, the positive effect of the monetary policy easing will mostly manifest itself in 2021. It is conditioned not solely on the standard lags of the monetary policy mechanism. This is linked to elevated credit risks, which are raising the cost of borrowing. This is why the material reduction of the key rate is needed to level out these effects and ensure a noticeable easing of monetary conditions for the economy. As for external conditions, they will remain complicated. Although strong measures taken by governments and central banks have ensured a rapid stabilization of financial markets, fundamental indicators of the global economy continue to be weak. The pandemic spread has not been brought under control by all countries, and restrictions are mainly preserved, which does not add optimism. Last week, the World Bank and the OECD revised their 2020 global economic outlook downwards. Additionally, geopolitical risks persist, thereby also dragging heavily on the world economic growth. This is predominantly true for the restrictions in the trade relations between major economies. The low growth rates of the global economy is the economic reality which we will have to face for a long time ahead. For Russia, this means a limited opportunity to expand its exports, including due to our commitments under the OPEC+ deal. In these conditions, the balance of risks remains skewed towards disinflationary factors. They are mainly linked to the uncertainty around the further development of the pandemic in Russia and abroad, and the pace of economic recovery as the restrictions are eased. Much will depend on the medium-term fiscal policy, as well as on support measures being adopted now, and also on further fiscal consolidation plans, and finally, on the speed and time horizon of the fiscal consolidation. Our current policy seeks to create accommodative monetary conditions for the economy amid low inflationary pressure and prevailing disinflationary risks. As the economy returns to its potential, conditions will become more conducive for a return to neutral monetary policy. The concrete timeframe for this to happen will depend on the totality of all factors, both domestic and external ones. They all have been mentioned above. Speaking about our monetary policy, whether it is tight as it is used to be or accommodative as it is now, is ultimately goal towards having to stabilize our inflation close to the 4% as our target. Thank you very much, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Please, Roman Markelev, the Rossiyskaya Gazette. Yes, good afternoon, Elvira Nabiullina. Could you please tell me, since these are the inflationary risks, do you allow that at one of the next Bank of Russia meetings it can reduce yet again the key rate with such a margin? Or if you feel like you need it, then the central bank will move over to the standard pace at 0.25? Thank you. We will continue to review the necessity for any additional measures to reduce our monetary policy and reducing the rate. But nevertheless, you are aware of our overall approach to move gradually, cautiously, by being mindful of all of the facts, analyzing all of the incoming information. So, of course, we do not believe that today's decision is a standard one. It will all depend upon the circumstances, but we do not deem it to be us switching to a new standard of decision-making. Thank you. Next question, please. Andrei Beryakov, Bloomberg. Good afternoon, Elvira Nabiullina. The world central banks and the FRS specifically are sending signals that the zero rates shall remain for a long period of time until the end of 2022. Does it mean that in Russia's case the low rates are for a long period, or will you be reviewing the range of the neutral rate anytime soon, and until which level? Thank you. Yes, indeed, the monetary policy by the leading central banks is one of the drivers which we took into account when making up our minds, but this is just one of a few. And we also are looking towards all other external as well as internal factors, as well as the environment and the global commodity markets and financial markets and the internal factors. But against all things being equal, of course, the easing of policy on the part of, similarly, the ECB and the Federal Reserve creates a broader leeway to ease it, but against all things being equal again. As far as the neutral rate is concerned, our expectation for a neutral rate is one of the parameters which impacts our forecast. Effectively, the status of our key rate with respect to the neutral rate as opposed to the economy does define the way we go, whether it's accommodative or it's tough, although it is not being so evenly seen. As I was saying, it's quite relative, and to ask the Bank of Russia to issue its specific opinion with respect to the neutral rate quite often hasn't been useful, because one of the previous times we debated the neutral rate within the main topics of the monetary and fiscal policy, which define our fundamental vision for the conditions and for the principles that we're to pursue within our monetary policy. And we intend to also do it this year with maybe only one change, because within our main principles of the and guidelines of the monetary policy that we're going to present in September, we will do the referral that we did of the work we did in July. So most probably in the report about monetary policy in July, we will try and elaborate on this. But as of right now, one may say that in terms of the arguments in favor of slightly adjusting our view over the neutral rate of the past year have strengthened. Yes, we would accumulate information, we would further specify our view, but to expect dramatic changes, one should not, although changes may occur. And I can tell you, for example, that the value below 5% is rather beyond, currently beyond the framework of our consideration. Thank you very much. The next question, please. Previously, the Sberbank strategist forecasted the reduction of the key rate down to 4% towards the end of September to allow for such an occurrence by that period of time. The question came from Maria Stepanova from TASS agency. Here, I can once again reiterate that the level of the key rate and the path forward within our monetary policy will be defined by the targets that are being set at achieving the stable inflation at the level of 4%, as well as the analysis of the range of factors which would be in effect at the point in time when we're making this decision, further specifying our forecast. So that is the only way I can answer in terms of the way we're going to decide on it. Dmitry Butlin, Commerzant. Good afternoon. In your mind, how your key rate decision, which may strongly impact the Ministry of Finance borrowing program for this year and for the next year, it is evident that the new government debt yield should be gradually going down. To what level it may fall down, and will there be new restrictions in terms of the amount of such borrowings? Let me repeat my position. In my mind, we've got enough space, or rather a potential, to increase government borrowings, and this can be utilized, and the Ministry of Finance does that. We are not giving away our forecast in terms of the value of the assets, but you could have noted that the current expectations for our rate decision today have partially been included by the market in its evaluation. So we're not offering any dramatic changes, but overall we do believe that the Ministry of Finance can go ahead with this government borrowing program that it's set out to move without any difficulties. Next question, Fabrice Elena from Reuters. Some of the analysts do believe that the current decision can be a completion of a cycle of the easing of the monetary policy. Is that the case? We do see strong, disinflationary factors we do take into account, but of course situation may alter, and so we would further be specifying what we think and making our decision based upon the current situation at each board of directors meeting. And we've sent a signal, once again I shall repeat it, that we will assess the necessity to further ease the monetary policy based upon the further coming new data and specified forecasts. Let me remind you that next meeting that we're having is one of the core ones, and so we will come up with this specificity. Tatiana Chubasovic, next one from Interfax. Good afternoon. My question is about the banking sector. What is your attitude towards the banks being engaged into saving big government companies? For example, we heard information that V2B may participate in additional capitalization of Aeroflot. And do you see the risks that the banks may grow out into the non-core assets like the case was during the crisis of 2008 and 9, when they ended up having on their books various transportation companies and real estate development entities? Do you see any risks of such assets being accumulated by the banks? Well, of course, the current environment does impact the quality of the assets. We are very well aware of it, and that is exactly something that happens in such conditions. And this time around, some very serious large-scale measures have been undertaken to support borrowers so that the loans issued to businesses, particularly in the affected businesses, wouldn't transform into the distressed loans, and so that the borrowers could recover their credit worthiness. So we don't really acknowledge this as a systemic or a massive problem of such debts being accumulated, although a certain growth in bad debt and similar kinds of assets in quality will be happening, and most probably it will manifest itself in the beginning of this year, in the end of this year, in the beginning of next year. And of course, all of the banks, not only major banks, are interested in retaining their capacity to sustain the creditworthiness of their borrowers and participate in various restructuring programs. In a number of cases, it may also be worthwhile, depending upon the exact situation, to convert debt into capital, amongst other purposes, in order to reduce the debt burden of the businesses which are over-borrowed and provide them with a better chance to develop. And that is an absolutely normal kind of an attitude. Each time, one must look at it depending upon all set of circumstances. And the next question from Anton Henberg from RBK. Good afternoon. The Bank of Russia, in its release, stated that the reduction of GDP in the second quarter may be more considerable than had been expected. What are, in terms of the annual indicators, we may be talking about? Can this decline be greater than 10%? Well, it is true that we are saying that the GDP decline in the second quarter may end up being a bit bigger than we had expected, because we were expecting it to be at about 8%, which was conditioned by the fact that restrictions lasted a little bit longer and that the recovery is going to be more gradual. But we do not expect this decline to be more than 10%, definitely. Thank you. Anastasia Shtlova, Interfax. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. I would like to ask you, does central bank take into account in its fiscal policy expectations possible personal income tax increase for affluent individuals? What is the level that this debate is currently taking place at? Is central bank involved in that? And what would you think about such possible personal income tax increase? And my second question, your forecast for inflation was 3.8 to 4.8, but taking into account the summary of all of the facts that you're referring to, including today, this inflationary one, doesn't this forecast look a little bit exaggerated? And what is the level that inflation may, play out against this year? What do you think? Thank you. Thank you. As far as the fiscal policy is concerned and various decisions in terms of the incomes and expenditures, this is, of course, the kind of a factor which does impact the fiscal policy, but we are not planning for any personal income tax rate change, and we are not participating in any discussions thereof. And as far as the inflation forecast is concerned, the last time that we came out with an official forecast was in April, so our expectation for inflation towards the end of the year is 3.8 to 4.8, which is quite a broad range, taking into account all of the circumstances on the uncertainty within many factors, which may influence inflation. So based on what we're thinking right now, most probably inflation shall remain at a lower range, but we will be more specific in July during our next core Board of Directors meetings. Thank you. And the next question comes from Yulia Makarova, Russia 24. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Elvira Nabiullina. During one of the previous press conferences, you said that you don't see any need for the negative real rates. Today, we see a different interpretation of it, i.e., that the lower threshold for the negative rate is 4%. Now, it's an argument, what kind of inflation should be deducted from the nominal rate, 12 months ahead, or the current monthly one, or simply the current one. It is important because the current inflation rates may slow down, and already around 3% is what we see. Could you explain your approach to evaluating the real rate, and what is the inflation that you believe should be deducted from the real rate, to be more specific? All right, indeed, if we take the current inflation, this is the inflation during the past 12 months. When making a decision about the businesses and the household usually, go for their future inflation expectations. And therefore, I believe that when defining the real rate, you should take into account the future inflation. So we take our inflation expectations for the next 12 months. And in as far as this is concerned, we don't expect to move over to the negative real rates. Please, Anastasia Saprekina from RIA Novosti. The question is, the banks in the Russian Federation demonstrated the record low profit, about 0.5 billion. What is the result that you expect in July? Do you not have any concern that the banks may end up finishing the year with a loss? Well, it is true that the May results turned out to be one of the lowest in terms of the level of profiting. July, we haven't yet received all of the information. It may look a little bit better in as far as our overall yearly expectations are concerned. We don't expect that the overall banking system will be in the red. There could be a little bit of a profit as well. And bearing in mind the fact that during the first few months the banks earned quite good amount of earnings, and the second factor is that the economy is gradually recovering, and so eventually we believe that towards the end of the year the banks will be with a profit. Now, next question from Anna Kaledina from Izvestia. Due to such a low key rate, already by autumn the deposit rate may go down below 5% per annum. Doesn't the regulator see the risk of the deposit outflow because of it? Indeed, our key rate is being lowered, and the deposit rates are also being adjusted, and loan rates, but nevertheless the deposit rates currently remain in the positive. And we believe that these shall remain in the positive. They would remain to be attractive, while there will be differences most probably between short-term and long-term rates, because our key rate to a larger extent impacts the short-term deposit rates, while the long-term ones are being defined by the profitability curves, and we expect that the long-term deposit rates will look more attractive from the point of view of interest for longer period of time deposited. Next question comes from Evgeny Belyakov, Komsomolskaya Pravda. Do you believe that the retail loans will become cheaper, and mortgage and consumer loans, because of the key rate being brought down? Without doubt, we are undertaking measures to reduce the key rate, amongst other things, in order to affect the monetary conditions and the pricing and the interest, and the rates may gradually go down, but that will be taking place with a lag, because our decisions on the monetary side of things come into effect with a bit of a lag, and our expectation is 3 to 6 quarters, and it will eventually be reflected in the rates. Basically, we see that the mortgage rates are becoming cheaper. The banks are stating that, but here there's a big support that they are having from the government in terms of the mortgage support in non-pledged loans. The banks do see a few risks, although our rate is going down. By the way, the banks do assess their risks means an upward pressure in as far as rates are concerned. Next question, Ivan Shwegin. Yes, good afternoon. Elvira Nabiullina, good afternoon. My question is this. Some time ago, we watched a very surprising thing, which was the negative oil price. Principally, I don't think that anybody remembers that, and very few were ready to face it in terms of the infrastructure. I mean, they've been managed to do something in Chicago, but elsewhere in the world, in India and in Russia, people were not quick enough to respond, and so they ensued quite a few disputable situations between the traders and the brokers and the MySex exchange itself. How these conflict situations are to be resolved and what are we to do next, trying to learn these lessons from the negative oil prices? Thank you very much. We've been watching very closely over the situation and the way the exchange has been acting. We didn't identify any digressions from it, but there is, of course, there are lessons to be learned, and so we're currently preparing guidelines for the exchange and for the traders in order, on the one hand, to improve the risk management capacity, but on the other hand, to also take into account all of the technological risks so as to improve the disclosure with respect to such dealings, and that applies to the derivatives in the first place. Therefore, this is the issue that is in our sights, and we're going to act through the guidelines issuing together with an exchange in order to minimize the risks for the trading participants, for the customers, for the investors. Rita Shpilevskaya from TASS agency. In your release, it is stated that the central bank will consider the validation of further reduction, so the regulator may take a pause during the next board of directors meetings. Yes, we are going to revisit the issue of whether it is worthwhile to reduce the key rate depending upon the information we receive, depending upon how more specific the forecast looks like, and quite possibly there may be a pause. But in terms of the further reduction, this is not something that we are in a position to predict. Tatiana Voronova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Elvira Sahibzadovna. It already has been almost 3 months in a row where we've seen that the amount of deposit hasn't been changing. I mean, these households are being quite refrained from putting all their money into the bank deposits. Could you explain, has the central bank had time to analyze this? What do you think? The lack of the deposit portfolio growth amongst the banks, does it mean that the households are currently eating through the money that they previously have been putting into the deposit, or possibly that this money remains in cash and goes into the stock market? I mean, what is happening to the money that the households usually have been putting into their deposits? Do households still have it? Thank you very much indeed. This is a very important question in order to understand how the household preferences are evolving, as well as their propensity to save and their propensity to consume under these circumstances. Just to try and explain something based upon the deposit dynamics is quite difficult, because our evaluation stems from the scholastic view, because during the periods restrictions have been introduced, people would be cashing out, trying to keep it at hand, trying to use their savings because their incomes have been falling. Some have even lost the ability to generate earning, and so they were quite keen in using their previously made savings. On top of it, there was a bit of a move towards cash payments as opposed to non-cash instruments in a lockdown situation. So people were using their deposits. So our people are using their money, to pay for what they desperately need. But in order to be able to understand what will happen further, we need to understand how preferences change. What will people do even after their incomes recover? Will they prefer to additionally save in order to recuperate in terms of their safety cushions but at the same time trying to catch up on some of the unspent demand, meaning that they would buy certain goods and services which they couldn't afford during the lockdown period. So that's the way the preferences will be changing. Overall, speaking about the deposits, despite all the changes since the beginning of the year, we've seen a certain deposit growth, nevertheless, by 1.4%. since the beginning of June, I mean, people are bringing their money back into their bank accounts. Ekaterina Titova, banqueros from Nizhny Novgorod. Irrespective of the key rate reduction, the banks are not fast enough to reduce their loan rents, and in the individuals, schemes are offering the same kind of credit cards at 24% per annum. Will there be any regulatory reduction of the loan rates because of the reduction of the key rates? Isn't that any concern that the Russians will stop bringing their money into the deposit because of such a low income yield that they get, and what kind of problems the banks may face because of it? I should grant you that automatically things are not happening in any case, because the way the rates are being changed in terms of the loans and deposits following the key rate change takes some time. On top of it, at the level of the rates is being affected by the credit risk assessment. So, like I previously said, whereas we see a certain decline in rates and mortgage in terms of the consumer loans, the rates may grow also because of the growing credit risks. To regulate or to set in an administrative way the level of rates, we believe is not worthwhile, because competition should be at work here between the credit institutions, and all of this should be defined on the basis of economic data. Alongside with that, we already have some introduced regulation which we believe to be sufficient in terms of the super rates, because this shouldn't be by 1/3 above the average market one. And so we're always disclosing information in terms of what are the average market rates all about. Thank you very much. Elvira Nabiullina, Bloomberg, good afternoon. Good afternoon. You can hear me, right? I would like to continue talking about the bad debt topic, and I would like to ask you, do you believe that there could be some sort of a comprehensive solution related to that? Because you said that the banks shouldn't create bad debts, but could there be some sort of a systemic approach to this problem, particularly since, as you have put it previously, there could be a peak possibly in the beginning of the next year, and some of the analysts currently are stating that without the government getting, weaving, its hands around it, nothing will happen. Maybe you're discussing something right now already. Thank you. I do confirm the position that I've stated previously. I do not believe it is necessary to set up some sort of an institution, a bank or a foundation for that. That's because it's true that the quality of assets may worsen, like I've stated, and in order to counter it, first of all, restructuring of loans is to be done. Secondly, we made it possible to the banks to gradually recognize their losses as they are being registered. Now, speaking about the systemic approaches, we believe in order to absorb losses, within difficult periods, we run counter-cyclical policy. So certain buffers have been established, not only in the mortgage loans, because we've got about 600 billion in a buffer in terms of the unsustained consumer loans. We also have also systemic significance buffers. And as these losses mature, as they materialize and surface, these buffers could be put to use along with a gradual moving out of the regulatory easing. Therefore, we'll try and do our best to apply these measures. So, yet again, I will confirm that the banks do possess sufficient capital to absorb these losses, and we are of the opinion that they are quite in a position to deal with the bad assets without any additional measures offered. Now, the next question comes from Evgenia Ogortsova, the Banks magazine. Good afternoon. The construction for the compensation of the government falling out incomes in the beneficial mortgage plan means that the compensation next year could be reconsidered. Is there a mechanism to introduce exemptions rates because of the dramatic reduction of the key rate? I really do not see such a need. If there are any difficulties, then we could analyze the market, and that is exactly what we will discuss with the government, because this is the government program which we support, and we believe that it is very much in demand. This mortgage, quite an affordable one. I don't see any difficulties, but if we do identify them, because we also witness that the government is able to flexibly fine-tune their programs as the need arises. Ludmila Petuchova, thank you. Yes, good afternoon. My question is this. The banks have warned the government that because of the fact that anti-crisis measures also brought along the restrictions in the acquiring rates, the cost of banking cards servicing could grow. Myself, as a bank customer, already see it because my bank's already warned me that it will start charging me for servicing my card. So my question is this. Do you understand how long these restrictions may remain in place in terms of the acquiring rates? Could it be that they will remain always in one place? And so, please. Thank you very much. We indeed have used our right to introduce restrictions for acquiring services, but only for online purchase, because it seems to me this was quite natural, because people are sitting at home and they are shopping from home, so they should be given this opportunity. So we made this decision as a temporary one, so we'll continue watching over it, and closer to the September 30th, we'll decide whether we should keep it, Here, what we're coming from is from an awareness that the level of the acquiring commission, the payment commission, should be defined by the market if there is a competition in it. So we are developing the system of fast payments, but of course these recent statements, to put it mildly, by the banks that the fees can grow, we're going to monitor it, because we don't have yet any authority to introduce restrictions. But I do not rule out that if the banks are going to grow the burden upon the households that use the cards, I don't rule out the possibility of requesting the Russian parliament to be given such an authority, so that in any extreme kind of a situation like with acquiring fees, this authority could be utilized and regulate the markets. Next question from Elena Fabricina from Reuters. What is the way that the central bank assesses the economic risks of the second wave of the coronavirus? Some people are waiting for the second wave of the ruble devaluation up to 90 rubles per dollar. Can there be such an effect from the second wave? We've considered different scenarios. We didn't exclude such developments, but our basic scenario doesn't include risks of the second coronavirus wave. And even if these risks materialize, we believe that the economic consequences are not going to be as strong, because the economic and financial system, as well as the household behavior, has adjusted to such risks, but we will decide depending upon the way things go. Evgenia Pismina, Bloomberg, good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. Since the beginning of May, ruble have appreciated by 6.5% already. So our ruble is becoming stronger than other emerging market currencies. Do you believe that the further strengthening of the ruble could be detrimental to the economic recovery? This is my first question. And the second question, 4.5%. Elvira Nabiullina, such a key rate. This is almost an historic point in time, because such a rare rate we haven't had since it became an instrument. What's your thinking of this milestone? Could you describe it? Does it mean anything to you as a milestone? Thank you. Thank you. As far as the exchange rate is concerned, appreciation, depreciation, and the way it affects the economy, we're continuously debating. Very often exporters are saying that the appreciation of the ruble undermines their export capacity. Importers, as well as those who are interested in buying foreign manufactured equipment, are of a different state of mind. Depending upon the debt situation, various companies do identify pros or contras in the way the exchange rate evolves. And I would say that that is exactly the advantage of a market-based floating rate, which balances in between the interests of all of the market players and the economic entities, reflecting both the current environment as well as external one. And that is the advantage that I see in such a floating rate, that it continuously changes. And of course, the appreciation of the ruble carries with it a disinflationary effect, which creates a bigger expanse for us to ease our monetary policy. As far as the 4.5% threshold is concerned, well, I've got a bit of a personal memory. When back in 2013 I was appointed as the governor of the central bank, the rate was 5.5%. And very positive sentiment there was then, when everyone expected further easing of the monetary policy as well as the key rate reduction. But over the past time, so many events did take place, and right now is exactly the point in time when we can reduce the key rate, but the level itself, the threshold, the milestone, is being defined by the kind of rate we need in order to ensure pricing stability, and specifically the inflation of 4%, the stabilization of inflation close to 4% level. Next question, please. Anastasia Shtilova, Interfax. Good afternoon. Good afternoon once again. Previously, you noted that in June you are expecting inflation to speed up to 4.3%, and then you said that annualized inflation may also speed up. What kind of inflation do you believe is going to be at a peak value, and within which period of this year? And my second question, some of the experts do say that it's more effective to reduce the rate not when some of the restrictions are still in place because the transmission mechanism is not going full swing. Do you agree? And in this step rate, 100% basis point, how much do you feel won't transform itself into the economy? And making this decision right now, haven't you made yourself hamstrung in limiting this potential for yourself in the future? Thank you very much for your questions. The inflation is not going to accelerate because the annual inflation indicators may grow, and that, in the first place, is related to the low base effect of the past year, because we think that if you take into account the annualized inflation, then in quantitative value, they're going to be at the maximum in the beginning of 2021, because our lowest inflation was in February last year. So that's here. I mean, the lowest inflation there may be. I mean, the highest inflation in terms of annual terms may be in February next year because of the base effect of this year. Now, in as far as the inflationary pressure is concerned, if you may describe it that way, we are usually measuring it in a seasonal, annualized and gradualized way. And so in March, April, the peak, basically considering what happened in April, we passed through the peak, and further on, we expect the disinflationary factors to kick in. Now, as far as the effectiveness of our monetary policy is concerned, we do agree this is something that we always underscore ourselves, that the monetary policy and the easing thereof is most effective during the period of restrictions being lifted, because when the restrictions are in place, the monetary policy may truly not achieve its outcomes, and so the easing of it may not achieve its outcomes. And so during such periods, the fiscal policy is more important, the fiscal stimulus is more important, and so I'm of the opinion that by timely undertaking of the measures, we are alleviating that. The restrictions are gradually being suspended, and we need to take into account the lag effect in terms of our decision, because it's about 3 to 6 quarters in terms of the lag effect that our measures do reach out into the economy. And so the monetary easing is exactly something that would manifest itself during the period of time necessary for the economy, when it is going to recover. And so with this in mind, the kind of decision that we made today, it will reach out to the economy, definitely, but it will be taking place with a bit of a lag in time. I know why we are not feeling hamstrung, because we think that if the situation is going to follow the basic scenario, quite possibly we may enjoy having an additional space to move around in order to ease the monetary policy. But when we are to make our decision, we will definitely be trying to go for the pricing stability and the inflation at the level of the 4%. The next question from Kaledina Anna is Vestia. Does the regulator expect deflation in August and after all? Well, quite possibly, because this is a seasonal, traditional deflation brought about by prices for various fruits and vegetables. This is quite possible, but it is not happening every year because our output of fruits and vegetables is more spread out in terms of the even load, and there would be less of the pricing, discrepancy. So that may definitely happen in the beginning of the autumn. Kazan, real time. When the central bank expects to see the economic effect from the change the key rate and what kind it will be? Well, once again, let me repeat, we certainly do expect to witness the economic effects as far as inflation is concerned. For the economy as well, it will be spread out in time. These lags may change because the household behavior change, the businesses change their attitudes, preferences, the credit risk assessments are higher, so quite possibly some modifications, so to say, in the transmission mechanism are possible within 3 to 6 quarters. That will definitely be seen. On top of it, there will be facts of, appearing from the previous decision, because let me remind you that we started easing the monetary policy in the June of last year, and in the spring of this year, we put it on hold. I mean, our easing policy, we put it on hold because of the volatility on the financial markets. But generally speaking, our monetary policy easing has been going on for almost a year, and the effect from each decision gradually accumulates, getting juxtaposed upon each other and ultimately affecting the economy. Commerçant, once again, Dmitry? Well, basically, you've answered my question, but nevertheless, 3 years ago, we've been heavily debating food inflation as well as in terms of the manufacturing. What do you think? What is the way that the things have been happening over the past few months may affect the agricultural output, and how, in its turn, that might in fact affect the expectations in the food inflation within the next year? Yes, indeed. For quite some time, our food prices, our views at the crop yield, so to say, do affect the inflation dynamics, particularly during the summer and winter seasons. I mean, to the extent that we are stocking up, that definitely may affect the situation in winter and autumn. But based on what the Minister of Agriculture is showing, we have organized a purpose-specific discussion of it under the board aegis with the regional offices in terms of to understand how the regions themselves see what the production is going to be. We do see that the production growth could be taking pace comparable to the previous years, simply because the previous years that will be the same. And so we do not see any outward disinflationary or inflationary effect, so these prices can be stable. But of course, a lot will depend upon how the situation may unfold in the next year, so we will continue monitoring it. Rita Shpilevskaya, does the central bank see the need to continue holding briefings about the economic situation and also issue its financial pulse? A very good question, because I actually wanted to inform you that today we are publishing the financial pulse review for the last time, and later on, once bi-weekly, we will be disclosing information about how the restructuring is taking place in lending, and we'll inform you regularly, but otherwise we will switch over to a more common and standard mode of us doing our work. And so briefings are going to be more standard. So the next meeting is going to be a call one, and it will also be followed by a press conference. I would like to thank all of you for your attention, for your questions, and wish you to be healthy, and all the best.